All right, we're back with another subsection of our public policy course on punishment. And those previous three, while they are, there are examples of using them here in the United States, they are not kind of the focus of our criminal justice system. They're not the reasons for punishment that we've pumped huge amounts of money into. They're not the theory underlying why our criminal justice system operates the way it does. So these final three, these are the ones that are really overwhelmingly controlling, at least here in the United States. So first we're going to talk about deterrence. And remember in that first slide where I listed all 6 reasons for punishment, there were 2 kinds of deterrence. There's specific deterrence and general deterrence. Now in general, deterrence means we're going to punish you or we're going to punish people so that they learn not to do it again. Hopefully, if the punishment is bad enough, the idea there is, I did A and got punished for it, so doing A is probably, I don't want to be punished again, so we're not going to do A again, right? Now, specific deterrence is aimed at the individual being punished, right? We catch somebody burglarizing a home, so we're going to punish them for it, send them to prison for a certain number of years, and then after they get out of prison, hopefully the idea here is they'll choose not to commit more burglaries because that punishment was really bad and they didn't like it, so now they're not going to do the thing that earned them that punishment anymore. General deterrence takes a look at kind of the wider society, right? So, previous example, person commits some burglaries, we arrest them, we send them to prison. General deterrence says we're punishing that person so that everybody else in our society can kind of look at that person and say, hey, that person committed a burglary and got punished for it. Now we shouldn't commit burglaries. So it's kind of using punishment to set an example for other people not being punished, right? So specific deterrence is about the person being punished. General deterrence is about using the person being punished as an example for everybody else, right? And deterrence is kind of the oldest or most historically well-known method or reason for punishment. And it dates back hundreds of years. The formal discussion of it goes back to a guy named Cesare Beccaria in Italy in the 17th century, 18th century, long before I was born. I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. And he kind of came up with the idea of deterrence, and it's all based on this kind of concept of rational choice, right? So people who are going to commit a crime are making a rational choice. They think about the positives of committing the crime and the possible negatives of committing the crime. So, if I commit this burglary, I might make a bunch of money. I'll have stuff that I can sell to get cash at a pawn shop or whatever. And then the possible negatives, well, am I going to get caught? What are the punishments if I do get caught, right? And then they kind of weigh those pros and cons. And if the pros outweigh the cons, they'll do the thing. If the cons outweigh the pros, they will not do the thing. So it's all about this kind of rational choice where people can kind of logically examine their options, pick which one is best, and that's how they make decisions. The problem with this rational choice theory is that it's just not supported by evidence at all, right? People do not make decisions in that manner, especially not criminal decisions, right? Whether they want to commit a crime or not. People aren't rational about it. People don't think about it logically. People don't accurately gauge the possible benefits and possible consequences. So even if they did use this process, which they don't, but if they did, they wouldn't be able to do it accurately because they don't have a good idea of the positives and negatives of any given criminal action, right? Now, according to deterrence, if you want to affect people's kind of balancing act, that pro versus con kind of calculus, there are 3 things you need to do, or that we as a society should do, to make choosing the criminal option the lesser choice, right? To kind of put a bunch of weight on that don't commit that crime side. And that all has to do with punishment. It's the certainty of punishment, the swiftness of punishment, and the severity of punishment. So the more certain we can make punishment, the more it's going to kind of weigh towards not committing that crime, right? Because if somebody knows that, well, I'm going to go out and commit this crime and I've got, say, a 1% chance of getting caught, that's not going to weigh very heavily on my decision whether to commit that crime or not. But if the chances of getting caught are 90% or 95%, that's going to weigh a lot more, right? So if we can increase the certainty of punishment, we should be able to deter the number of people choosing to commit crimes. Same thing with swiftness of punishment. If people get punished kind of right away, very quickly after they commit this criminal act, it will be easier for them in their minds to kind of connect the two events and say, oh, I'm not going to commit that crime ever again because, I got punished for it very quickly. And thus it's connected in my mind. Punishment bad, action brought punishment. I shouldn't do action, right? And then, of course, there's the severity of punishment. The more severe the punishment is, the more effect it's going to have on that calculus, that balancing act. So if they think, oh, well, my odds of getting caught are 75%, but even if I do get caught, it's going to be a really minor fine and really not a big deal. That's going to weigh less heavily than, oh, if I get caught, I'm going to go to prison for 20 years or the rest of my life or whatever. Now, once again, these kind of sound good in theory, and we've based essentially our entire criminal justice system on this theory, but it's really not supported by evidence. Affecting the certainty, the swiftness, and the severity of kind of official punishments doesn't seem to work. Putting more officers on the streets to increase the number of criminals they catch doesn't reduce crime. Changing punishments for certain crimes from 2 years in prison to 20 years in prison doesn't really affect crime, right? And a lot of that is the fact that, again, criminals don't make a rational choice. This is, when people are confronted with the opportunity to commit a crime, they don't think logically. They don't have that rational balancing act in their head the way this theory kind of relies upon. There is a little bit of evidence for some amount of deterrence, but the vast majority of that is kind of points to the punishment, not legal punishment, not getting arrested, not getting fined, not going to prison, but the informal punishments, right? When people are deterred from committing crime, it's not because they're going to get caught and sent to prison. It's because they might get caught and then their parents would find out they did this bad thing, or their wife or husband would know that they had done this bad thing, and they don't want that informal kind of, friends and family and loved ones and religious leaders and co-workers and all those things. It's that punishment that scares people into being deterred from committing a crime. So the more of these informal social controls we can give to people, the better. That's kind of the one way we might actually have a deterrent effect on crime. But no matter how many police we have, no matter how many people we lock up, no matter how many people we give the death penalty to, that's not going to affect the crime rate essentially at all. Okay? All right, so the last one we're going to talk about then is incapacitation. Incapacitation is essentially says, if you commit a crime, we are going to punish you by taking you off the street, not providing you the opportunity to commit more crimes, right? So the idea here is if you've committed one crime, clearly you're going to commit more crimes. But if we put you in prison or give you the death penalty or do whatever, you will not have that opportunity to be living your daily life, doing what you would normally do, and committing more crimes, right? There's collective incapacitation and there's selective incapacitation. And collective incapacitation is basically says, if we take all drug users off the streets and put them in prisons, there will be no more drug use, so drug sales will go down. So, but we're going to round up an entire class of people, an entire type of criminal, and we're going to lock them all away so that these crimes don't happen. Selective incapacitation basically says, look, not all burglars are the same. Not all armed robbers are the same. Not all, pick a crime. Not all the people that do that are the same. The vast majority of people who get arrested and convicted for crimes never commit another crime, right? So if we want selective incapacitation, we want to find the kind of people who are going to commit crime after crime after crime after crime after crime and only incapacitate those people, or at least focus our incapacitation on those people, those habitual offenders, right? Problem is, this is really, really difficult to do. Figuring out who, if we let 100 people out of a prison tomorrow, trying to pick which one out of those hundreds, or which 5, or which 10, or which 50 out of those 100 are going to go on to commit more crimes, and which are going to go on to lead perfectly law-abiding lives, is an incredibly difficult process that nobody's been able to do a good job at. Even people who think they can do a good job, when they, get actually tested, their ideas, their processes, their standards, their measures for how likely somebody is to recidivate in the future, they're really bad. Even the most successful ones are better than chance only by a little bit, right? The other problem here is diminishing returns, right? So if we incapacitate the worst of the worst, we're going to get a pretty large return. But then if we double the size of our prison, or double the size of the number of people we're incapacitating, obviously, since we already had the worst of the worst incapacitated, now we're going to have to bring in something less than the worst of the worst. So crime might still go down because we've incapacitated double the amount of people, but it's not going to go down as much as it did with that first group. And then if we incapacitate even more people and increase our prison population and increase our take the number of possible future criminals off the street more and more and more and more and more, we're going to get lower and lower likelihoods of people recidivating, going to prison for a long time, and being incapacitated. So as we incapacitate more and more and more, for each given number of people we're incapacitating, we see a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller actual reduction in crime, because fewer and fewer and fewer of the people we're having to incapacitate, because we're casting our net wider and wider, are people who would have actually committed more crimes in the future. So incapacitation can work for if you do it a little bit, but the more you do it, the more you choose to incapacitate, the higher percentage of your population you start sending to prison, you start pretty quickly getting no more diminishing incapacitation reduction in crime, and you can jail thousands and thousands and millions of more people, and you're not going to see any actual reduction in the crime rate, because the people you're incapacitating wouldn't have committed more crimes anyway, right? You're now down to people who are stealing a loaf of bread to feed a hungry family member, like prisoner 24601, right? The other problem here is there's a lot of crimes, especially the ones the United States was most focused on for decades, i.e. drug crimes, where incapacitation really doesn't work because of either co-offending or replacement, right? If you've got 10 people involved in a drug ring and you lock up 2 of them, the other 8 are still going to be able to commit all the crimes that the whole group of 10 was, right? So you're not actually reducing the number of crimes by locking up some small percentage of any given organization, right? Or any given gang, or any given collection group of people who are committing crimes. And then there's just replacement. Even if we arrest, there's a drug smuggling operation that has 10 people in it. We arrest all 10, we send them all to prison, co-offending is not going to be a problem anymore. There's just going to be another group that takes their place because there's a demand for drugs in the United States. So there's lots of money to be made by smuggling them in. So somebody else, within hours sometimes, is going to be in a position to start doing that again. So by incapacitating all those drug smugglers, we haven't reduced the amount of drugs at all, right? So replacement can be a really big deal. Just because we're incapacitating a criminal doesn't mean that any crimes they would have committed if we hadn't incapacitated them aren't actually going to happen. We haven't guaranteed that those crimes aren't going to be committed. We've just guaranteed that the crimes aren't going to be committed by that person. But if there's some motivation for somebody else to commit them, we haven't actually prevented any crime by incapacitating that person. All right, that is the end of my lecture on punishment. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.